Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're doing something a bit different. I'm stepping into the role of a witness to deliver a dark, cautionary oral testimony. This is a grim, gothic fable about the architecture of your very own mind. We're going to dive into how the human psyche can literally destroy itself, because when authentic, philosophical striving is replaced by repression, irony, and regression, well, the dialectic curdles, and the mind just burns from the inside out. So our fable kicks off with this incredibly tragic, almost darkly comic irony. You have a self that actually chooses the illusion of sterile safety over true, fictine self-actualization. Johann Gottlieb Fichte, the brilliant idealist philosopher, argued that the self, or the I, is pure activity. It exists only because it acts, and it thrives only when it's striving to overcome limits. But what happens when the I flat out refuses that struggle? What happens when it decides to sit down and build a fortress of laws just to hide from the world? It invites its own destruction.
To really grasp this descent, we can map these vivid, monstrous Gothic figures directly onto a professional psychological framework, mixing both Freud and Fichte. We've got three main actors in our psychic drama. First up, the king, or high judge, acting as the superego and Fichte's stagnant I. Next is the tarantula, embodying the primal id, representing the repressed not I. And finally, the jester. He's our broken ego, serving as a completely maladaptive mediator between the two. Let's start our testimony right in the heart of the kingdom of the stagnant I. Picture the superego sitting on its high throne, acting like a profoundly paranoid ruler. In a healthy mind, the self is actively engaging with its boundaries. But this king, he's completely ceased to strive. Instead, he's created this static museum of the soul. He uses rigid, authoritarian legalism as a sort of psychological bandage to insulate himself from what the text brilliantly calls the shock of becoming. Fichte would view this static state as literal spiritual death. This king mistakes sterile safety for moral virtue, and in doing so completely freezes his own potential for growth. But here's the catch. Because the superego refuses to consciously encounter and synthesize its opposition, that opposition doesn't just politely go away. It festers. In Fichte's framework, this boundary is known as the not I, but because the king represses it, it mutates into the id. In our fable, it's personified as von Nixt. In a really cool nod to Nietzschean philology, that translates to of nothingness, the literal linguistic embodiment of creeping nihilism. It takes the form of this grotesque tarantula, lurking right beneath the floorboards of the throne room, completely driven by a subterranean hunger for revenge. And this right here perfectly captures the core failure of the psyche. Fichte believed the not I was absolutely essential friction for growth. It's the necessary resistance we actually need to discover our own freedom. But by repressing it, by refusing to even name or confront this limit, the king turns a massive opportunity for growth into a parasite. The relationship stops being dialectical. By denying the boundary, the mind is literally breeding its own doom in the shadows. And then enter the jester. Now, in a functional Fichtean setup, our consciousness, the ego, is supposed to mediate the relationship between the self and the world through productive, moral striving. But our jester? He represents a wildly maladaptive, broken ego. He acts as a nihilistic deconstructor, driven by this intense theoretical allergy to all forms of authority. He doesn't build, he only dismantles. Instead of helping the self master its darker impulses, the jester is just whispering pure poison. He intentionally feeds that tarantula's resentment right through the floorboards. He weaponizes the seductive language of liberation, plotting to smash order, but crucially, he never creates a higher synthesis to replace it. It's a terrifying psychological trap. He's reducing the necessary productive philosophical tension of the mind into pure chaotic resentment. So you can see how these elements lock together to form a fatal trap. First, we have the foundation, the superego's massive repression. Second, the accelerant, the jester's nihilistic whisper. Now, we hit the breaking point. The third step is the stare into the void mirror, which ultimately ignites the fourth step, the total inferno of nihilism. Here is where the trap actually springs. The jester forces the high judge to look directly into the frameless void mirror. And in an instant, the illusion of the stagnant I shatters completely. The text refers to this as a revelation without illumination. The judge suddenly realizes that his strict legalism was never actually about achieving a higher moral law, which Fichte would call the absolute I's moral destiny. Nope,
It was just a hidden, base desire for power. It was nothing more than the visceral, sadistic sensation of the gavel's descent. And this is the absolute turning point, because the walls of the psyche were built completely on repression rather than an honest, dialectical confrontation. They literally cannot handle the truth. This exposure triggers a catastrophic collapse of symbols. The mind just cannot synthesize the sudden, violent influx of the repressed id, that terrifying tarantula rising up from the floorboards. It's the ultimate failure of Fichtean mediation, resulting in the entire tribunal burning to the ground in an inferno of nihilism. The self as it was known dissolves entirely. But our testimony doesn't end in the ashes. From that smoke rises a new, deeply terrifying figure, the Red Judge. Now, Fichtean synthesis is supposed to result in higher consciousness and freedom, but here we get a regressive, monstrous hybrid of the stagnant superego and the vengeful id. This new entity completely eliminates the concept of becoming, freezing the psychological dialectic dead in its tracks. And this brings us to the true tragedy of the fable. The Red Judge trades the gavel of mediation for a branding iron of pure retribution. He's building a monument to destruction, proudly ensuring that the soul remains flat and sterile. If modern personal growth is a mountain path of striving, the Red Judge just paves it over. He replaces it with a mindless, inescapable cycle of revenge, trapping the psyche in terminal regression. Thankfully, there is a sliver of light in this Gothic nightmare. We do have a Fichtean escape route, one deeply rooted in Nietzschean philology. And that is the archetype of Das Wanderer, the wanderer. This figure is the true Fichtean I. Das Wanderer utterly rejects the suffocating safety of the dust and the stagnant throne, choosing instead to step up as the creative architect of their own transformation. When you compare the two, it's a stark existential choice. On one side, you have the Red Judge, representing terminal regression, a branding iron of retribution, and a soul trapped in a sterile wasteland. But on the other side, Das Wanderer. This is the very embodiment of actionable, modern personal growth. Das Wanderer consciously embraces the productive friction of the not-I, actively turning the monsters in the walls into the very fuel needed for evolution. This wanderer gets a really profound psychological truth. To avoid that inferno of nihilism, the ego can't fill the void with weaponized resentment or sterile restrictive laws. It has to be filled with the fire of continuous, courageous self-transformation. True justice in the architecture of your psyche isn't about punishing the shadows. It is the active, lived struggle to surpass your own limits and actually embrace the friction of the world.
So, as I conclude this dark testimony, I want to leave you with a question about your own inner architecture. We all face the friction of the not-I, the shadows, the boundaries of our existence. The question is, which master is currently building your psyche? Are you ruling your mind with the static branding iron of the Red Judge, or are you brave enough to step into the unknown, walking the mountain path of Das Wanderer? Thank you for joining me for this explainer. Keep striving, and I'll catch you in the next one.